Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Candace is a superstar. In fact, she just got a nice shout out from Kanye West saying, "I love the way Candace Owens thinks," which honestly is it's hard to even put into words the significance of a rap artist like him singling out a conservative-minded pundit like Candace. I think there's a seismic shift happening in America in the black community that is going to be a generational ideological civil war, in the words of Candace Owens. So we went to UC Berkeley and UCLA, and what's interesting about Candace Owens is she uses identity politics against the left. And so truth should be colorblind, and any individual should be able to say what they want to say despite their skin color or their gender. Unfortunately, that's not the case on a college campus. So I'll say something, it might trigger the audience, but Candace will say that, and they're perfectly okay with that. And that shouldn't be the case, but that just shows how...
But it must be harder for her, on the contrary side, to be conservative and black.
Without a doubt. And the societal punishment she receives for that is horrific.
Like what? What's happening?
Well, the things that the words they call her, I wouldn't even repeat on camera, but, the nice ones are Uncle Tom,
right?
Coon, things of that nature. She has a very, just the harsh backlash for what she believes and what she feels, because how dare she stray away from the ideological monopoly that the left has on the black community. And for those people that don't know, that might be watching internationally, the Democrat Party receives 96 to 97% of all black voters in America, despite the Democrat policies having the worst impact on the black community. And so Candace is trying to wake up that community, and so we're happy to have her as our communications director and help enhance her vision to try to at least get people to think differently. So.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to Warren Farrell later today, and he just wrote a book called The Boy Crisis, and in there he talks a fair bit about the pernicious effect of fatherlessness, and that's something that I'm very interested in. In Ontario, we have, as part of standard political policy, that all families are equal, and the idea there is that respect should be given to familial units regardless of their structure. And there's something to be said for that, because people have to struggle through life the best they can, whether they're single parents or regardless of how they put their family together. But the empirical data on the catastrophe of fatherlessness is extraordinarily solid and deep, and it seems to be something in principle that's a particular plague for the black community.
That's correct.
And I guess I'm wondering too, like with the conservative approach to that, have you guys focused on the problems of fatherlessness, and what's your take on that?
Oh, and without a doubt, if I had to pinpoint one societal trend that has harmed the black community the most, it would be the rise of single motherhood in the U.S. So to give a number, just so people understand, the single motherhood rate in the 1960s was about 18% in the black community. Now it's 77%. 77% of U.S. blacks will grow up never knowing their father. There's no rational argument that is healthy for a society, and the reason for that.
Oh, there's an article in the Atlantic Monthly just 2 weeks ago showing that, which is notable, right? Because it's not like the Atlantic is a right-leaning magazine.
Anything but.
yeah, and they can be even-handed when they're at their best, and they reviewed the new evidence that was presented in this research paper, which I also read, showing that if you look at those few locales where poor black people and poor white people do approximately as well, if you track them over a reasonable amount of time, the thing that characterizes the high-functioning poorer places is the presence of fathers.
That's exactly right.
And they said that not only, the researchers claimed that not only was that good in the immediate family, so to have your father around, but in neighborhoods where having fathers around is the norm, every boy in particular does better in the neighborhoods.
That's right, and crime goes down. The likelihood of not going to prison obviously goes down. But the interesting question is we have to ask why. So we as conservatives always try to ask, what is the reason this is happening? And whereas the left, I don't always think they go through that or they ignore it willingly. The reason is because of the Great Society that was passed by Lyndon Baines Johnson in the mid-1960s, where the U.S. government literally subsidized single motherhood, where if you got married, you lost your government check. And it still exists to this day in the States, where the idea and the intention was, well, let's try to help single mothers. Okay, that's fine. I don't think anyone doesn't want to help single mothers. The problem is as soon as you get married, you lose that check because it was a program designed for single motherhood. And so when you incentivize bad behavior, you get more of it. And that's exactly what you've seen in the States. You couple that with a disastrous public education system run by public sector teacher unions that have no accountability, protected by tenure, and really embrace mediocrity at its highest form, with failing urban cities with Democrat mayors that have no grasp of free enterprise or how to properly run any sort of organization, let alone a massive municipality or city. That's why you have the black community failing so much. The final point I'll say is this. In the States, the two poorest communities by race, if you will, are the two communities that receive the most government assistance per capita, the Native American community and the African American community. And so we can draw a direct correlation and distinction between the rise of the welfare state in America and actually the decline of the black community and the Native American community. But the solution to that is black fathers. And so we always say black fathers matter.
Well, there seems to be an employment issue too, and I mean that's a complicated problem because, the employment market for people who are less skilled has been, I would say, in decline, especially on the male end of the distribution. And one of the stats that Farrell cites is that 3/4 of women will not consider seriously dating an unemployed man, whereas 1/3 of men would have a problem dating an unemployed woman. So there's obviously a gender bias there, and I think there's a reason for that. I think that it's grounded in both rationality and evolutionary biology. The evolutionary biology element is that women across cultures tend to mate across and up hierarchies, let's say.
That's right.
And the reason for that, I think, is that they're logically, and this is where the logic comes in as well as the biology, they're looking for a partner that can be of substantial economic utility, practical utility, when they put themselves in the vulnerable position of having a child. So then you also have this additional problem is if the employment situation tanks in any serious way, then men become less desirable as partners. And your claim, I guess, in part is that by filling that void, the government actually contributes to the problem rather than addressing it.
That's exactly
and
right.
that's tied in, I suppose, too, with the high rates of incarceration for black people in the United States.
And then you have a negative feedback loop where you get more of that bad behavior. So the black fathers go to prison, so they're not there to raise the kids. The kids go to gangs, so they'll end up either dead in prison, hopeless, or completely directionless. The black single mothers who want to continue to do what's right for the community, they're left with very few choices. Have more kids.
Right.
And so it's a negative feedback loop. So you have bad behavior reinforcing more bad behavior subsidized by the government. Then you have the complete destruction of what used to be a somewhat civilized portion of American life, which if you look at the worst areas in America, it's the inner cities, predominantly with the African American community. And so but the interesting point is, how on earth is it that black people today, their grandfathers lived a better life than their fathers? Is America more racist today than it was in the 1960s? Absolutely not. America's become significantly less racist. But if you look to the American left or the social justice warriors, the academic and the neo-Marxists, they pinpoint racism as the significant driving force to why black people are doing poorly in America. And
that's a problem too that I've talked about with regards to gender inequality in pay. It's like,
which you've been wonderful on.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different reasons for difference. If you analyze differences in important attributes by group, whatever your group measure is, you're going to find that there's a dozen contributors, just to pick a number
multivariate
out of the air.
analysis, to use your quote.
Yeah,
right?
well, and the thing is that you can attribute a certain amount of the difference in success between groups to, let's call it, racial attitudes or ethnocentrism on the part of the dominant group. It's complicated because in the U.S., Asians do really quite spectacularly well. Jews do well. Nigerians do pretty damn well. Black immigrants do quite well.
That's correct.
So it's much more complex than a simple racial analysis would indicate. And the problem, I guess, in part with the group fostered analysis is that people make the claim that a single factor, prejudice essentially, is the cause of all the problems. And then that has the additionally pernicious effect of blanketing everyone who isn't in the oppressed group that's being spoken for at the moment as oppressors, and also and this is an even more pernicious element, and I really believe that this is part of the fundamental motivation of the pathological left, is that there's a war on the idea of competence itself, because if you take someone who's worked hard and been productive and been useful and admirable in all the ways that you might hope someone was, and then you tell them that the only reason that they've been successful is because of their skin color, let's say, and the systemic racism that characterizes the society, then what you do is undermine the entire idea that competence itself might be the basis of a hierarchy. And that way, and I really think that desire to undermine the idea that hierarchies can be based on competence is associated with the deep Marxism that's associated with the radical left. And I can't think of an idea